Alright everyone, we start off today with hilarious news, which is that the Seattle City Council, there's a veto-proof majority of people there that have now officially pledged support for defunding the Seattle police force by 50%, which means they're not even going to have, dispatchers anymore. It's not immediately clear how they're actually going to be able to coordinate policing the city of Seattle anymore. And so again, and I would strenuously admonish any of my fans who happen to live in Seattle, if you're living in the area controlled by this council, which is inner city Seattle, I'm assuming that like most cities it doesn't directly control policing in the suburbs. If you live there and you have the means to do so, I strongly recommend moving as quickly as possible, even if you have to take a business hit, and I'll tell you why. You're about to see exactly what happened in the city of Detroit many, many years ago. The city of Detroit experienced, they tried to label it white flight at the time. The idea was, well, the white people got scared because in the civil rights era, there were several riots. That's actually not the case. What happened is that systemic corruption, riots, and the inability of the city to control those riots scared everybody. The problem is that only people in the upper echelons have the ability to move. People who are dirt poor, who are flipping burgers at Wendy's, typically don't have the leisure to move outside of the inner city if they've already taken up residence there. They might not even have enough money on a month-to-month basis to make their rent or eat anything other than ramen. What makes you think that they qualify for any of the jobs that would be in the outer area? Jobs that are usually already filled. And right now, keep in mind, we're also in a recession where a lot of jobs are still closed or certainly not hiring and growing because of far-left policies. No less in a place like Seattle, certainly Washington State, run by the far left as it is. It's one of the most far-left up-and-coming places in the country. What's going to happen is that the city center is going to be hollowed out. Seattle won't stop existing. It's just that everyone from the middle and upper middle class, when possible, will move out of that area, and they'll move to surrounding towns, they'll move to other cities, possibly in Washington State. A lot of the people that left Detroit, they just settled a few miles outside of Detroit. They formed new neighborhoods. Those areas are doing fine, by the way. Outside of Detroit, if you get beyond like Highland Park and some of these other areas, if you go a couple of miles outside, unless you go towards Flint, of course, what you find is you find basically small town communities. You find that the same people who left Detroit because, they didn't want to deal with the fact that the city was unable to function, they settled in surrounding areas. Most of the time, people don't like to move like halfway across the country. A lot of people have this sort of pioneer tendency, and they're like, well, I'm leaving New York. I'm going to go buy a farm in East Texas or something. That's really cool and everything, but most people don't do that, especially if they have family attachments. They have work associations in that area, network of friends and so forth. They're going to stay relatively local. You're going to see the city of Seattle fundamentally collapse. When that happens, they will blame racism. They will blame right-wing extremism. They'll blame everything except for the real problem, which will be the fact that they are castrating their police force. We've already seen, over the prior weeks, we've seen that at its current rate, the SPD is not capable of defending all of Seattle. It doesn't have the resources, and it didn't have the will of the political establishment behind it. The biggest problem is that the police were fundamentally thrown under the bus and told to heel by their own mayor and by the city council that influences them. They were essentially threatened by these politicians. Don't go into Chaz. Don't defend local business owners. Don't do literally what you are paid to do. That's what happened. Now imagine that you get rid of the dispatchers and much of their funding, and much of their equipment probably, I would think, goes bye-bye along with half of the work position. I mean, are they going to fire beat cops too? I guess the idea is that they're going to have, citizen volunteers or something riding along with the police. We're going to de-escalate the situation with good vibes. Now, what's going to happen is there's going to be a crime spree in Seattle. Eventually, one of two things will happen. Either because the left is purely culpable for the situation, the left will then lose an election, a city election. The problem is, of course, in an inner city, that's a very much uphill battle. And the city will then be reformed. It'll be like New York was when it was going through its reformist period until fairly recently with idiot de Blasio. Or it'll go Detroit mode. It'll collapse. It'll stop being a powerful city. Seattle will become like Detroit. Detroit is no longer a primary U.S. city. It's a secondary city. It's mainly known for sports at this point. It has no other real point of being there. Detroit has been hollowed out. It is a shell of its former self. People doing like urban exploration like Detroit, and pretty much everyone else thinks it sucks. I've yet to meet somebody online who says, yeah, I live in Detroit. It's fucking great, man. Probably because if they think that, they're a crackhead, and they're probably too passed out to respond to my DMs on Twitter. Seattle could very well go the same way. If you therefore have the mobility, the ability to move out, whether it's to an outlying area that will still be policed, or whether it's to another part of the United States, I strongly recommend doing it quickly, because what's going to happen, I guarantee that upon this announcement alone, thousands of people are going to move out of the city of Seattle. I don't think that anyone's going to be moving back in. We're in the middle of a recession. It'll probably last some months, and if Trump loses the election, it'll last another 4 years. Seattle will be broke. It will end up having to downsize other things too, or it'll ram itself in the ass with debt, which is exactly what happened to Detroit. Look at the Detroit City Council. You want to see something funny sometime? Look at Detroit City Council meetings and look at the dumbassery that runs their city. This is a city that's purely blighted. We all know why it's blighted. People left, in part because the city's broke, in part because the city was overrun with crime. Once you get that metastasizing emptiness and abandonment in communities, it tends to spread. Nobody wants to live next to the bad neighborhood any more than they want to live in it. You don't want to live a block away from Highland Park. And so the margins of these areas that get blighted, they tend to rot away too. It slowly saps the life out of a city. Eventually you run out of taxpayer money to actually fund things. But the Detroit City Council is stacked with a bunch of goddamn fucking far-left weirdos that are perpetually voted for by a population that has been also hollowed out. There's no attempt at reform. Again, there are exceptions. New York City went through from one of the most dangerous fucking places in the fucking Western Hemisphere to being a reasonably safe city, all things considered with per capita crime. It reformed itself. Meanwhile, St. Louis and Detroit didn't, and they still haven't. Even odds for Seattle. I wouldn't want to take that risk. If I had a home somewhere in Seattle, if I had an apartment or something, I would sell it. I would sell everything and I would move. I would leave the fucking city. And the people of Seattle need to understand, you now have a very brief window of time, in the electoral sense, to kick these bums out and save your city and make it worth living in. Get a mayor and a council willing to defend the population and allow the police to do what they're actually paid to do. Unfortunately, it is unlikely that will happen, because most of the people that feel strongly enough about it, they'll just fucking leave. Entire neighborhoods will probably uproot and move elsewhere. This happened with Detroit. It's happened before. This is not unprecedented. You think, when you're living in that maybe reasonably good part of Seattle, you know, you're living in the middle class apartment zone or something, it's easy to ignore the looming threat. Think about what a 50% loss of budgeting to the police and the death of the concept of police dispatchers actually on the ground means. It means that crime will go unpunished, criminals will proliferate, more windows will be smashed, and guess what? There will probably be more politically motivated riots in your city because nobody's going to do anything about it. These people have been emboldened. They're very brazen now. They've been told by the mayor of Seattle herself, if you riot, we're not going to get involved. Hell, you know, we're so cocked, we're so fucking stupid, we're going to get rid of our dispatchers and defund the police. By the way, let's assume that this is more or less about appeasement. You know, the mayor's worried because people camped out on her lawn. Oh my God, well these people are serious. Okay, I'll defund the police. It won't work. Because next they'll say, well, you defunded them 50%, what about the other 50%? We said get rid of the police. I guarantee that some of these leftists will do that. The neoliberals have cocked. They took a step back when they realized how unpopular things like this were. And they said, whoa. Defunding the police we don't want to disband police and get rid of them. We just want to take some money from them and give them to the poor or something. We just want to have citizen advisors ride with them, make sure that, you know, situations don't become deadly and dumb shit like that. We don't want to get rid of the police. We just want to make them wear chastity belts and live in a cuck shed. That's basically what the neoliberals switched to. The far left is still, no, we really mean disband the police. Defunding them means get rid of them. Get rid of them, their money and so forth. They're still going to push the issue. And the next time it happens, there won't be dispatchers. There won't be as many cops. They won't be able to respond as easily. Hell, they couldn't even respond now. The SPD was already essentially castrated by the Seattle mayor. It was funny. The police shouldn't have even bothered to respond when there were protesters, which were actually not throwing bricks at the time, outside of her fucking house. Should have just said, oh, well, we're not allowed to respond. This is a riot of peace. If they break into your home, don't bother calling us. We're not allowed to respond, dude. That's what they should have done. Of course, they wouldn't want to do that. Then they get defunded even quicker. It's disgraceful is what it is. So yeah, if you live in Seattle, I would definitely leave. Another problem is that sometimes the rot seeps into neighboring towns and cities as well. So you might not be safe just moving to the suburbs outside of Seattle where you still have cops. The rioters might come there and the same thing might happen. How many times do you want to move? Just fucking leave Washington State high and dry. It's a dumb state anyway. That's about all. Peace out.